In this episode of Beyond the Horizon, Enable Head Nerds Joe Ferla and Stefanie Hammond discuss the effect the cloud is having on how MSPs charge for their services.
There's over 3.3 million companies now globally that are relying on and using M365. And cyber criminals, they see this increase in popularity as just kind of another chance, another way to exploit organizations and get money and cause real disruption for it.
Hey, my name's Joe Ferla, and I'm one of the head nerds here at Enable. And I, with some of the other head nerds, have looked into starting a series, a podcast series, if you will, about cloud challenges that we see commonly across the MSP market. So over the next 3 to 4 podcasts, you guys will see me quite regularly. I'll be your lovely host. Well, we can cut the lovely part. I'll be your host. And for the first of our series, we decided we were going to bring in one of our heavy hitters with Stefanie Hammond, the sales and marketing nerd. So quickly, to introduce myself, like I said, I'm Joe Ferla. I'm traditionally the Mac, the insight, and the operational efficiency head nerd. And when going into a podcast series in the cloud, I wanted to focus on sales first because I find with MSPs, we get the tech and we can have those conversations. We get the security, we get the implementation, but where we as MSPs tend to struggle the most, be it from a lack of knowledge, be it from what we may think is a morality position where we're not quite thinking about what value of services we're offering, it's the sales and marketing half. So I'm very happy to introduce Stefanie into our podcast as our first episode, bringing in what, Stefanie, 25 to 100 years of experience
don't make me that old.
in this.
It's 21. It will be 21 in November, Joe. So, I'm not ready to move forward to 25 yet, but yeah, 21.
Right. So 21 years of experience working with MSPs. Stefanie, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into this whole sales and marketing as MSPs are making that migration to the cloud.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Joe, for having me on your inaugural podcast for this. My name is Stefanie Hammond, and as Joe said, I am as well part of the Head Nerd team. I always say I'm kind of the nerd that doesn't belong, right? You know, one of these things is not like the other. The guys on the team, they're all technical. They're all very product focused, you know, with their different areas of specialization and expertise. I'm the head nerd that focuses on all things sales and marketing related. Most importantly, how do you take all of those tools in your tech stack, you know, whether they're Enable tools or not? Obviously, we hope that you're going to try out our Enable tool sets, but, you know, it doesn't matter what your tech stack is. How can you bundle that up, price that, go to market, and make a lot of money off of it? So that's basically my role.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. And look, what we've kind of done here is I back up Stefanie on the nerd team, and I get some of these questions. Stefanie, I think, gets these almost daily. And where we're pulling from this podcast, at least for myself primarily when I was creating this, was our Empower events, right? The places where folks from the Enable family come meet just to exchange information and get education. Right? These Empower events tend to be places where everybody checks their ego at the door and comes in with an open mind, as an open book to educate, to exchange knowledge, to talk about trials and tribulations they have as an MSP. And over the past 2 major Empower events that we've had, Frisco, Texas, and Berlin, a lot of what I hear from the MSPs I talk to the most, mid-market, small market, is we're moving to the cloud. What do I do? How do I price? How do I package? How do I sell this product? End users are more and more becoming informed about what they are using for technology, right? Gone are the days where end users don't know what a patch is. Gone are the days where end users couldn't tell you off the top of their head the difference between a server and a workstation. Right. So as we as MSPs are migrating to this new environment, we're dealing more and more with a we'll call them semi-educated end user base.
Yeah.
They know that you can blow up a virtual machine and create a new one in an hour and a half. They know that there is not as much permanence in this world. And MSPs are having problems coming to grips with that when they're selling. Am I selling the same services? Am I selling the same packages? Am I selling at the same price point? Am I selling at the same level, right? Do I sell to device? Do I sell to user? How do I look at doing this? So to kind of kick us off, we're going to start with some of the basics here. And Stefanie, will turn it over to you in just a second to kind of give us the rundown. But starting with the easy question, right? With this move to virtual environments and with this move to the cloud, where MSPs are seeing all of these pressures that they haven't before in regards to pricing, in regards to packaging, do we really want to change how we bundle our services? Do we need to do it differently? And then on top of that, when we're looking at bundling into primary service agreements or SOWs, do you separately look at bundling things like the cloud and things like physical devices or users?
Yeah. Yeah, I think with the move to cloud, the bundling does change, but not in the way that you might be thinking. We are rebundling our services, not because I think we're implementing virtual environments and we're making the move to wanting to offer cloud services, but rather, MSPs that I work with, we're changing the bundles because of the cloud, but more importantly, it's the ever-changing threat landscape. It always comes back to cybersecurity and the myriad of kind of the new threats and the new threat actors that are targeting organizations every second of every day, right? And so when we used to think about kind of that old notion of security, we were primarily focused on protecting, and I talk about this in all my security boot camps, kind of those 5 layers that surround an organization's employees and its data. It's kind of like an onion, right? Like we have our internet layer, which is kind of that perimeter layer. We have our network layer, then we have our people layer, and then we have our application layer, and then we have kind of that device layer, which is the devices that end users are using. And back 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, as the MSP, you made sure that your security package included, antivirus, patch, made sure you had a good firewall in place and that you were backing up. And so that kind of package worked really well, enough to keep kind of the bad guys out of an organization's network and to keep its data safe. But if you look at today's environment now, fast forward to today, we have this new hybrid work model. We have a workforce that often isn't behind a corporate firewall. You and I are examples of that. You're working from home. I've worked from home for the past 18 years. You travel a lot. I don't get out so much. But anyway, like employees are not behind this corporate firewall. And so to allow that, there's been the introduction of more and more SaaS-based applications that companies are using, with I think the biggest one being, Microsoft 365. There's over 3.3 million companies now globally that are relying on and using M365 as their primary productivity, communication, collaboration platform. And cyber criminals, there's an opportunity here that they can exploit. They see this increase in M365 popularity as just kind of another chance, another way to exploit organizations and get money and cause real disruption for it. And so the cloud, especially like cloud email, it's just become like another lucrative way that cyber criminals can use and leverage to gain unauthorized access into an organization's network. And that now needs protecting as well. And it wasn't so much of a concern about 5 years ago, but it is now. And so that's why actually in MSP's go-to-market bundles, that's why they need to change, because MSPs now need to kind of concern themselves with protecting the emergence of that new 6th layer, kind of over top of everything, that now makes up many organizations' network, that cloud layer. And so now we have to have the monitoring and the management, the protection of virtual environments as well. And so it should not be kept separate. It should not be charged separately, but rather it should be kind of folded in and included into an MSP's what I feel their base security package, whatever your minimum viable security package is, because cyber criminals are attempting to exploit those environments as well. And, going with Lewis Pope, our head security nerd, he always says, and I say this in a lot of my boot camps as well, I parrot him a lot, you can't protect what you aren't monitoring. You can't protect and secure what you don't know about. And so, however, that organization's environment is designed, and MSP should be building, bundling, promoting a package that's going to monitor, protect, and manage and secure all of it, regardless of whether it's physical or virtual or a combination thereof.
Gotcha. So to kind of build off this, to me, it sounds like the cloud drives a bit of this change in bundling. But say we were pre-pandemic, there really wouldn't be much change there. Okay, I go from an Exchange server to a SaaS email product. Great. I'm not changing much. It sounds like more so it's this commoditization of cybersecurity or commoditization of cyber attacks that's driving this change into the differentiation of our bundles.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because at the end of the day, there's so many different ways that cyber criminals are trying to get into organizations' network to cause disruption and steal data. So the cloud has just become another way. Whether we've had this pandemic or not, eventually we were going to get there. I think the pandemic just kind of accelerated it all for all of us. But it's now become this other way, this new layer, because as technology evolves, as the complexity evolves, cyber criminals are using it and leveraging and trying to figure out how they can gain access into that as well. So yeah, I think it's really been cybersecurity and the advancement and the sophistication of threats that are coming at businesses these days, that it just doesn't make sense to kind of say, well, this is the cloud and this is the virtual environment, we're going to carve it off and we'll charge separately for that. Because again, going back to what Lewis always says, you can't monitor, you can't protect, you can't secure what you don't know about. So you have to have it all within your purview, and be managing and monitoring it all. Again, regardless, physical, virtual.
Yeah, and it's something I kind of took from Lewis as well, to parrot him, but in a little bit different of a fashion. Kind of combining you in this is I always tell MSPs what we sell is productivity and peace of mind through cybersecurity. We don't sell tech. We don't
No.
sell EDR. We don't sell infrastructure. We sell productivity. So it seems like that's very much where we're going with the building of these bundles. We're adding that new layer. We're bringing in another level of sophistication for us as MSPs to kind of continue that ability to provide productivity.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and to take it one step further, productivity is an outcome. So MSPs are selling outcomes, like they're problem solvers. And when we talk about productivity, maybe it's because team members, like, look at you and I, you're in US, I'm in Canada, but yet we talk and we collaborate and we work together very well all day long because of the tool sets and because of what the cloud has now afforded us. And that is an outcome that many businesses are looking to get, and that's a service that MSPs can provide. But productivity and collaboration, that is what a lot of businesses desire, and that's a problem a lot of them are facing. And so your job as the MSP is say, well, how can I make this easier for you? How can I make this more productive? How can I make your employees more productive? How can we get this installed and implemented in a seamless way for you? That's the outcome that MSPs are providing.
Right. And I kind of drive you in that direction shamelessly because I know what your next answer is going to be to this question. Because I think it's a very good setup for MSPs to start understanding that while we're moving into the cloud and while we're changing how we're providing support and the time and efforts target to provide that support, we really shouldn't be selling off of that tech and that support and that means to the end, right? We need to be selling to that outcome
Yeah.
So when it comes to this move to the cloud, right, how are MSPs pricing this? How are we looking at these services? And should we be pricing differently? Should we be looking at, again, carving off physical versus virtual environments to properly price and push our sales process and our sales motion?
Yeah. I do get this question a lot as well. And I feel that just because you're moving or might be moving your customer's environment to the cloud, this doesn't mean that you now feel that you have to charge less, because maybe you have less devices that you have to manage. It's a good reminder that we're not time material anymore. We're not pricing our programs on time like we used to do, like 20-25 years ago, right? But now it's really around this outcomes that, like you said, and value, this value management piece and the benefits that you're able to provide to customers with your services. And again, regardless of how those services are actually implemented, because with your services, especially if you do move them to the cloud, this is where the benefits, this is where the outcomes come into play that you were talking about, from a increased productivity standpoint, increased performance, increased reliability, which all leads to increases in productivity, increased efficiency. Maybe your customer is really looking to expand and grow and to do that as seamlessly and as easily as possible, so you're able to provide improved scalability and flexibility as that organization grows. You're going to help them manage their costs. You're going to be able to now provide better security protection coverage, especially if those employees are all working remotely, right? Like, you've just kind of expanded that attack surface if you have employees like us that work predominantly remotely. All of these are all benefits that you can offer and outcomes that you can offer, and really ways that you can help make customers more competitive and agile in the marketplace. And so if you're telling me that I'll have an MSP say, well, if I remove a server and if I move it to the cloud, I have to charge my client less because there's less management time, there's less oversight that's now needed because I'm working with cloud infrastructure. Yeah, that's probably likely true. I'll leave it up to my techie colleagues to talk about that. But again, it doesn't matter when it comes to pricing your services. It actually offers you a better opportunity to improve your own margins, for your services contracts. But I think it also drives home the point that MSPs, if you're doing per device pricing today, you might want to start looking at making that shift towards more per user based pricing. Because if you stick with per device pricing, then like, this could impact you, because if you are consolidating devices, removing devices, putting devices into the cloud, and there's now less devices there, regardless if they're physical or virtual, then if you are charging per device, then you might see a dip in your MRR because you are now managing and monitoring and taking care of fewer devices. But if you switch to per user pricing, then really the number of devices doesn't come into play, because at the end of the day, you're managing users and you're helping to improve the safety and security and the productivity of the employee's organization. They're employees, they're users. And so again, it doesn't really matter what devices they're using or what that infrastructure setup looks like. So it's kind of those two things, like thinking about outcomes, thinking about the value that you're providing, and then making that switch from device-based to user-based, and kind of keeping it focused on the users.
Yeah, and I very much like that user point, kind of tying it back into your first answer here, where we were almost without this cloud layer in the security program, right? If we're charging by device, it's very hard to start tying in individual user costs or individual device costs to these devices, where if we're charging per user, it's much easier, right? I remember we were going through Cloud Commander, and how are we going to price Cloud Commander for some of our clientele? Well, how are we going to have them price Cloud Commander for their clientele, I should say? And we really struggled, right? Is it going to be, $20 for 100 people? Is it going to be $40 for 200 people? Should it be $20 per domain, right? Should it be, by device, by user, by whatever? And in the end, when I look at pricing per user, I see that kind of argument over Cloud Commander. And where does Azure pricing sit? Where management sit? Where does Intune sit? Where does M365 sit? Where does remediation of risky users and all of this stuff sit? It becomes a whole lot easier when I'm just saying, okay, if I've got 100 users at an environment or in an environment, it's going to cost me X amount of money.
Yeah.
Reasonable prediction. Here's my time and material. Here's what it would have cost me in the past. Let's hope X comes out to be the same. To make it easy on us for this example, just divide it by 100. There's your price per user.
Yeah.
And I think that's something MSPs that have been highly successful in the market have started to go to. I can almost see a trend. The larger the MSP or the more successful I see an MSP being in our customer and partner base, the more I see per user pricing, right? The
Yeah.
more I see almost environment-wide pricing for even some of them. That's very rare. I would love everybody to do that. I don't think we could.
Well, and it's funny because I was just listening to a recording from the TSIA, and they were advocating value-based pricing and outcome-based pricing, and that they were saying per user pricing is out of date, and MSPs need to evolve. And so that's a whole other podcast, I think, because I think in my mind it makes sense. I just don't know in practicality how MSPs today, given the primary operational maturity that at least with the ones that I deal with, I don't think we're there yet to make that switch, in the next few years over to this value-based, outcome-based pricing model that they were talking about.
Yeah, I would agree. I see us getting close, but I don't see us there yet, right? I see a lot more MSPs taking some of your advice. Selfishly, I'll say some of my advice as well, where I see in a sales motion, they're stopping talking about tech almost entirely. You have to mention I use SentinelOne, I use Cove, right? Like you got to name drop a little bit, right? But more so what people doing is
a non-technical
selling.
business owner wouldn't care about SentinelOne or Cove. Like, I'm sorry, I know there are products that we sell, but if an MSP is unless you're dealing, sorry, we're gonna have a little bit of an argument here.
Yeah, no, let's do this.
Unless the MSP is speaking in a co-managed type of client where you're dealing with maybe the IT director, the CTO of an organization, yeah, tool drop all day long because you're having a technical conversation with another technical person.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are talking with, I always call it a traditional managed services customer that's typically non-technical, they don't have anybody in-house that manages their IT. They just want to run a business and run a successful business. You telling them, well, I use SentinelOne or I use Cove for backup. I don't care. I'm assuming you're using something, and I trust if I'm going to choose you as my MSP, I'm trusting that you're using the best tools out there to give me the outcomes that I'm looking for. Agility, flexibility, security, increased performance, reliability, which is improving my employee productivity. That's what I'm expecting. Could care less the tools that you're using on the back end to do that.
And I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it also comes down a little bit to the salesperson, right?
Oh, it's all sales skills.
Right. So
it's
your sales skills leaps and bounds above mine. So I'll use the example in Formula One, right? If I am trying to sell, or if I have you trying to sell a driver, right? You're selling that individual and their skill sets and what they can do for you. If I have to do it, I'm going to mention they're on Ferrari, right? Or I'm going to mention they're on McLaren or Red Bull or whatever team,
I think
right?
SaaS tools in cars are not in the same.
And no, they're not. But what I say with that, and what I mean by that is I need that crutch selling. So am I going to explain why I chose SentinelOne over CrowdStrike or any of these other tools? No. Is it going to be a bullet point in my presentation? Probably not. but I'm going to have a little bit of a name drop in there just so if this person wants to, they can research it, but they also know I have a little bit more credibility than just my MSP.
That's fair.
Now, the other side of this too is I was smaller than most of our clientele as an MSP when I was selling. I needed a little bit of help with that credibility, even though I cheated in my sales process. But that's a whole nother
Whole
conversation.
other podcast.
But to get back into this, what I mean to say and kind of bringing it into what I'm excited to see more MSPs doing is their value selling, right? I talk about
That is
how
for
when
sure.
I sold, one of the things I would do is I would break down the cost it is for me to manage your business. I would bring in statistics about my response time and my uptime stats and that kind of deal. And then what I would do is show my clients that either by the end of or Q1 or the middle of Q2, you have paid for my services. And my big like hook at the end of my sales pitch is what are you going to do with an extra 2.5 quarters worth of revenue, right? Figure out what we can do to help the business.
Yeah.
And then I would also talk them through, okay, we could upgrade this on the tech side, right? I dealt with veterinary practices. We could get a new x-ray machine, right? And I use that not only as kind of a sales tool, but also a way to bring myself in as not just an MSP, but a business partner. I care
Consultant.
about your business. I care about your tech. I'm your VCIO. I'm your
Yes.
CIO,
Yeah.
right? So when you talk value selling, that's where I see this ending. And then to bring it even further back to a point where we come into environment as a whole selling, we need to see a market that sells in that value-based selling, I would think first. But more importantly, I think what we need to see is the mid and small bit, the like mid to small business market start to realize what the enterprise level market truly has bought into 100%. And that is the more you put to IT, the more you make. There's almost a direct relationship there.
Yeah.
Right. So when I talk to large MSPs, like some of the ones we talked to at Empower, right, they're like, look, I can go to an enterprise level co-managed service pitch or prospect, and I think I'm putting down crazy on the table, and they're biting it crazy, right?
Because they get it.
Meanwhile, what this business is looking at this is okay, I'm going to invest X amount of money here to this service, right? And we're going to get Y back from this MSP. That is more valuable than what I'm paying for it, right? And I think MSPs need to start to understand that we're going to start to see that trickle down of this mentality, right? You know, gone are the days of low tech small businesses, right? I mean,
Pretty much, if you think about any business that an MSP would want to have as a client someday, it's tech. Like tech is the backbone to the successful performance of that business. And if there are any low tech, I'm going to go see my hairdresser tonight. She has an iPad. Like she's not very high tech, but she also would not be the type of business that an MSP would be targeting because of that. MSPs generally
right.
will always try and target kind of the technology centric, the technology dependent organizations.
Nice. So that kind of also ties us into when we're looking at selling to these organizations and we are looking at providing that value in our sales process. Where do MSPs start to forget about what they're doing with pricing in general? And then what do they start to forget about with pricing inside the cloud environments that they've been dealing with?
Well, again, I always say don't carve the cloud out. It's just part of the entire environment that you are responsible for. And again, like you'll have different MSPs that have different opinions on the cloud and how much of the cloud they should be moving their customers towards. So again, whole other podcast. But in general, like the issues that I see when I'm helping MSPs with pricing is they come at it from a tools perspective. So kind of going back to, they're trying to sell tech, and they'll say, hey, I just bought MDR, EDR backup. I was thinking charging $5 per user because, you're charging me, and I'm just making this up. I can't remember what our EDR pricing is, but, I'm being charged $275 for it. Does $5 to $6 a user sound like a good? I'm just going to kind of double it basically. So they think that if I just buy my tool and I just double my tools cost and call it a day, I'm good. And yes, tools cost, software's cost, like whatever your tech stack is. And this kind of, takes a step back to looking at your services and how are you bundling those services. Like you need to know what it is that you're selling out to the market so that you can define what that tech stack is. So once you know what that tech stack is, yes, we need to know, our tools costs for that tech stack. But it's not just applying a 50 or 100% markup to it and calling it a day. Kind of like you said, we need to put in our factor in our operational time. We need to factor in our management time to manage those tools and manage the environment. And if you are a MSP that hasn't really done a lot from an automation perspective, and so you're doing this management more manually than using kind of the built-in automation that a lot of these tools have, then you're going to have increased management costs. And you can't lie about that. Like I would have MSP say, well, I'm just going to shave some time off of here, because we have a costing calculator that we use with our customers to help with this. I'm going to just shave some time off of here because it's making my pricing too much. And I have to come back and say, well, is that a realistic time estimate that you need to put in because you're not leveraging automation, with your RMM and stuff like that? And they'll say, yeah, we're not using a whole lot. And so you don't want to lie to yourself on a spreadsheet because that's just going to follow through all the way to the end and kind of sliver away at your margins. So that's one thing that I see a lot of I'm not going to say a lot of MSPs, but that's one thing that I see MSPs kind of struggling with pricing, is not being accurate and honest with themselves with how much time is actually needed to manage the network and those tools based on their level of automation. Another thing that I also always talk about is EBRs, executive business reviews. Very passionate that every MSP should be making EBRs a cornerstone of their MSP practice and just a cornerstone of their customer engagement process. But that takes time. You're looking at, probably a couple of hours to, collect your data, prepare for the meeting, and then you got a good couple of hours to deliver the meeting. You need to build in that consulting time as well. And I see MSPs not doing that either because they're not doing EBRs, or they're doing it sporadically, or they just don't think about it. So that is time that, you want to include because you're going to be using top resources to kind of maybe put that together. So you want to factor in time for that. And then the other thing where I see from a pricing perspective where I really like to see MSPs do better is, and it kind of gets us towards more of that value-based pricing conversation, is building in appropriate contract margins into the contract. If you look at service leadership or really anything, even our own benchmarking that we do through business transformation, best in class MSPs are building in anywhere 50 to, I think we're at 62% contract margin that they're building in. I've seen this as high as 80, 85, 90% with the real security centric, good sales focused MSPs. Because they're building in, that value. They recognize that, the customers that they are targeting, the customers that they're working with, they're riskier clientele. They operate in risky industries. And so they're able to charge more because it's a risky client, which means it's posing a risk to you as the MSP. And so because there's a greater degree of risk for your MSP, if that customer gets breached, that impact of that breach could be detrimental to both you and your customer if you don't have the right set of security services put in. So again, this is where you can charge a little bit more than, someone that's just out there, hey, I'm taking my EDR and marking it up 100%. Like there's only so much you can add or make off of selling a tool. So that's the other thing that I would say. Bundle it in together, set of services, determine your tech stack, get your software costs, get your management time, and then make sure that you are awarding yourself a good, generous margin so that you can compensate yourself for that risk element and for that time, for the value, the outcomes that you're providing.
Yeah, couple things I heard there, and I promise we'll tie this back into the cloud because I think we have something big that MSPs are kind of not quite thinking about. But real quick, so on your first point, where high automation and high operational efficiency is what's going to look at decreasing time management costs and the like.
Yeah.
It's always struck me as odd that the MSPs who are the most operationally efficient are typically the most expensive.
Yeah.
Right? But the MSPs that are the least efficient, who have the largest time management, are selling on a race to the bottom with pricing. Right? I can't. It baffles me how many MSPs I've seen join our partnership and join Enable, put zero into automating, right? Just drive prices to the ground and then get confused as to why, they can't make any money off their business. So I know you kind of, go through that as point one and get into the really bigger points, but like, I think this is something that MSPs need to understand. The larger, the more successful, and success doesn't have to be ARR. It doesn't have to mean you're a huge MSP, right? I look at some of the most operationally efficient or successful MSPs I see, and they're not the biggest.
Yeah.
They're exactly where they want to be in the market. They're exactly where they want to be for their geolocation, right? But they have gone at or above 60 to 70% automation of their day-to-day service delivery.
Yeah.
Right? And as an Enable head nerd, I really want them to grow just so I can tell other MSPs I told you so. But as a partner with them and as a consultant, which is really what the head nerds are, I look at them and I just like, they ask me questions. I'm like, what do you want me to answer? You've already solved the problem here, right? So kind of interesting to see that you bring up that point with this.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll put in with your executive business reviews, where you say these are paramount to your packaging and to your MSP services, right? To put some kind of context to this from the technical side, the better you are at being an MSP, the less your end users know you're there. And you need brand recognition. What's your primary retention play is brand recognition. You can do all you can to put a Systray app on the Windows devices that's your little logo. You can have the email portal branded with your logo. You can have all of this stuff, but that's never enough for retention. Somebody's going to come in and say, when was the last time you saw your MSP? Oh, it was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
The end user isn't going to connect. It was 3 weeks ago because you are tantamount to being the best MSP in the nation, right? They're going to go, oh, my MSP must not care about me. Because the person who's bringing that up is probably a salesperson.
Yeah.
And they're probably going into some type of spin selling motion to where the end of it's going to be, oh my God, my current MSP stinks, right? So
if they've done it well, that's what you want them thinking.
Right. But so these executive business reviews, this is where you show your value.
Absolutely.
This is the
100%.
2 hours, the 3 hours a month you get to sit down with your end users and turn yourself into that consultant. Make yourself something more than just an MSP, right? I know you were talking to me about one of your clients who does executive business reviews that are almost 3 hours long, lunches included,
Oh yeah.
and 30 minutes of the
Impressive.
conversation is, what did I do over the past quarter? That's it. The next 2.5 hours is, where are you moving in the next year, 5 years, and 10 years? Because let's be honest, a business plan is not the next 12 months. You're lying to yourself if you think that's a business plan.
That's a roadmap.
That's running a business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Business plan is 5 to 10 years. And this MSP on a quarterly basis is updating what they're doing with that end user's business plan. They're so entrenched with their end users, it's not even funny at this point.
Yeah.
Right? They're almost impossible to get rid of. So executive business reviews are one of these things that I think goes into this value type selling. And then the last point I have is, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of, without maybe knowing it, of what MSPs are forgetting about pricing for cloud environments, right? In the beginning, we mentioned there's a whole nother level of security.
Yeah.
Sure, device management is cheaper. I just got 3 or 4 new pieces of software that house credentials or proprietary information, or super secret, keep it super safe data, right? They house my clients' information, they house my employees' information, they house my information, right? So when we talk about Stefanie here saying that we need to start building in this packaging to accommodate a greater degree of risk, I think the thing that MSPs tend to be forgetting about is how much risk the cloud brings in.
Yeah.
Right? We look at Azure and go, oh, this is stable, right? Forgetting about the fact that twice last year, Azure went down for, I think, 6 to 12 hours, if not more, right? We forget about the fact that sometimes to have actions in Intune or M365 or Entra ID or Azure can take, hours,
Yeah.
depending on what Microsoft wants to do. It's not like we're managing these devices in the physical form anymore. And, if I'm looking at downtime to replace a hard drive, it's how quickly can I slap one in,
Well, and
right?
even what our GM Robert Johnson says about for Adlumen, he says for M365, like our MDR product is stopping 1 to 2 M365 breaches a day. I think is what he said in a recent podcast with Chris Massey. So it's the cloud. It's bringing a lot of efficiencies, for MSPs. It's bringing a lot of efficiencies to organizations, but absolutely it has elevated the risk for both organizations, because especially when you look at 365, like who doesn't use it, and it has all the data for every organization, all the emails, all the communication, all the collaboration that's going on with teams. Like that is just so much data that's being housed in there and stored in there that needs protecting, because you do not want to have anybody getting unauthorized access, unauthorized user access into that. So it's a good point.
Yeah. So I really go with, right, you kind of hit tangentially here from the sales side of it, right? Machine management's a little bit easier in the cloud, right? But now there's 2 more points of access, right? M365 may be a little bit more secure sometimes than your Exchange server, right? But we're putting more credentials, we're putting more access, we're putting more admin availability into here, and we're increasing those security risks. So I think that's something that we could probably chalk up to these MSPs need to think about this, because we, kind of glibly in my case, but we say like, oh, we sell productivity and peace of mind through cybersecurity. What that really boils down to, in a much more kind of heavy way of saying it, is we sell productivity and peace of mind through risk acceptance, because that's what we're doing. We're accepting risk, right? When an end user has an event, no matter who caused it, right? The CEO of the company could have clicked on the email that says $10 Starbucks gift card, and gift card has 2 capital letters, and Starbucks is spelled with an X instead of CKS, right? And they click that link wanting that $10, right? They know they're to blame, but who's really taking the blame? It's the MSP, right?
Absolutely.
So I think things we need to kind of remember.
Yeah.
And then the last question we really have for you, Stefanie, to kind of tie this up, because we're going to be moving into more of the sales process here. We talked about pricing, we talked about bundling, we talked about what MSPs are forgetting, and we talk a lot about what we should be doing for sales, but how are we really doing it? How are we positioning our services differently in today's day and age than we were 2, 3 pre-pandemic, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? And with that, are the position that our services sit inside the organization different, right? Do we even have to talk about services in a fashion? Because like you mentioned, we shouldn't even be selling tech, right?
No.
I'll take a slap on the wrist for it.
You're answering your own question here, Joe.
I know, but like, you talk about this so much on a day to day, and I know this is something that's very near and dear to your heart. So I kind of want you to give your opinion on this as well.
Yeah. So again, just like it doesn't matter what you're selling. Like you could be selling widgets. It doesn't matter what you're selling. You won't win a sale, you won't win a client if you can't identify what the problem is first that organization is struggling and dealing with. Without a problem being uncovered via your marketing or via your sales discovery, and if you can't have the customer then validate that this is a problem for their business, you're not going to win the sale, you're not going to win them on as a client. And the idea here is that through a good discovery, the bigger the problem that you can uncover, and the more heated that customer or that prospect gets around, I really need to get this problem solved. It's really hindering our growth as a business. So they really want that problem to get solved. This is where your value increases as well. The value that your services, however you stack them up, that's going to be paramount to that customer. If you can demonstrate, here's a problem, this problem is a huge problem that they've been dealing with for a long time. Here's your solution. You can alleviate that problem. So kind of going back to, selling that peace of mind. What's the peace of mind that business owner would like to see in their future that you can help them out with? And so again, that fundamental philosophy can be applied to really anything that an MSP is selling. Whether you're selling to customers that have physical environments or virtual environments, or trying to sell, your cloud security services, or if you're trying to propose a project, to move physical assets into a virtual environment, because again, at the end of the day, you're not selling tech, you're not selling cloud to end users, because again, we kind of talked about this earlier, you always want to kind of keep in mind who you're selling to. And for the most part, unless I'm going to carve out the co-managers, that's a totally different talk track, totally different messaging.
Whole separate podcast.
We've got so many different more podcasts to do, Joe. But again, if you're speaking to a traditional managed services prospect with a non-technical business owner, CEO, CFO, at the end of the day, they really likely don't care what their network infrastructure looks like. They probably don't care how it's set up. They wouldn't know what the best setup should be, whether it should be virtual, whether it should be physical, whether it should be a combination of. I really don't think business owners, CFOs, CEOs really care. But going back to what do they care about? And it's dealing with what are they struggling with as an organization. And I feel like I'm kind of on a broken record in this podcast today, because they care about, or they're struggling with, how to make their organization more operationally efficient. They're concerned with how to make their employees more productive, how to improve their performance, especially if they are kind of out and about in the world, not necessarily always behind a corporate firewall. Organizations are struggling with how do they better manage and control their costs? How do they meet their company growth and expansion plans? Like you talk about that business plan 3, 5, 10 years out. Does their technology today going to help them with those expansion plans? And is it going to help maximize their revenues? Like, again, really thinking about what business owners, I always talk about being the love language. What is the love language of business owners? They just want to make and have a more competitive business. How can you help them with that? And so if your solution to overcoming whatever those challenges are, and this kind of goes to making sure you have a good, content marketing strategy, making sure that you have a good initial sales discovery so that you're asking the right types of questions to uncover what are their, and I hate using the term pain points, what are their struggles, what are their issues, what's really keeping them from really making them the business that they could be. What are those aspects that are stopping and hindering their growth? And if you can uncover those, And then your solution can work to resolve those challenges in a efficient and seamless and easy way possible. That's how you're going to win the business, because you're hitting on what business owners actually care about, not tech.
And so kind of to wrap up here, right? Because I think there's a lot that we hit, but I want to give you just a couple more minutes, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, to kind of go through quickly, like, can we summarize what we've talked about today into maybe some tips and tricks of selling?
Yeah.
And then also kind of building off this last point, how do you if everybody's doing this, which we know they're not, you're not a broken record yet, because not everybody, the vast majority of MSPs we talk to aren't doing this, right? How do we differentiate ourselves?
Yeah, and it's really a thing around being able to have really good listening skills, having really good questioning techniques, so that you can really understand your customers or your prospects' business. And the more that you can understand their industry, their business, their problems, their issues, if you can uncover those for that organization, that's what's going to help you sell. And so I think one of the things that I do struggle with when I'm working with MSPs on their marketing or sales is I don't feel that they don't go deep enough in terms of what they know about their customers. Like, and this is kind of the benefit if you do specialize. I know a lot of MSPs that don't specialize in industries or sectors or whatever, but I think one of the benefits, if you decide to double down and go the specialization route in a certain industry, when you have conversations with those types of MSPs, gosh, they're good conversations, because they know that industry hands down. They know the trends, they know the challenges, they know the priorities of their organizations, of those customers. And so they can take that and they can assume that if they're talking to a new prospect, that they're going to have kind of the same set of challenges, the same set of priorities. And so being able to improve your listening, improve your questioning, potentially, maybe think about going more specialized. Those are going to help you from a differentiation perspective. Another thing to help with that, because I get that question a lot. How do I differentiate, from my competitors? Like, because there's 338,000 different companies out there delivering some sort of managed services, according to our last Horizons report, our 2025 Horizons report. That is a huge Herculean task to try and get a foothold in. I'm going to do a plug for my sales and marketing book club that I run every month, because I'm trying to help, again, MSPs level up their marketing, level up their sales skills. And one of the books that we read, it was actually last month's book, no, two books ago. It was by Eric Peterson. It was called Conversations That Win the Complex Sale. And he really went in. This whole book was on differentiation. How do you differentiate your business? And he talked about, he had this diagram in the book, and it was a Venn diagram. And so here's you as the MSP, here's your competitors, here's your customers. And where the three of you intersect, this is where you're all delivering the same thing. You and your competitors are delivering the same set of services to meet the needs of your customer. But when you look at that part of the Venn diagram where only you and the customer or that prospect overlap, there's that little sliver there. And he calls this the value wedge. And so this is where, you have services, you have offerings that are outside of what your prospects or outside of what your competitors are offering. And it's this value wedge that you should be concentrating on, like the areas that you're different. Now, the issue with trying to figure out your value wedge and to figure out what he calls your power messaging is that, again, MSPs, you're busy. I get it, but they're not going deep enough, again, because of lack of time, lack of resources. There's a lot of fires that have to be put out. But in order to figure out that value edge, you need to do your reconnaissance. You need to spend time doing your research. You need to do your competitor analysis of your main competitors. You need to look very comprehensively at their websites, at their social presence, at their, what are they doing out in the real world? You should be following them, seeing what kind of news releases come out, press releases come out. Understand what is it that they offer, what messaging are they putting out there, and then make sure you don't sound like them. And I don't think, a lot of MSPs are doing that to the degree that they really should. And so the one of the answers in the book is really, brainstorm with your team, but also talk to your customers, talk to your prospects, figure out, that information, that data, so that you can really figure out what that value wedge is, what that power messaging book is, to really kind of help you with that differentiation piece. And so that book, Conversations That Win the Complex Sale, I think has probably done the best description or provided the best guidance on how to truly work to differentiate yourself. Because I know there's a lot of stuff out there. Oh, do this to differentiate, do this, but he actually gives a really good framework, and I really like it. So it was a good discussion that we had a couple of months ago on that.
So as we're wrapping up, this kind of brings me to another quick point that I would love to learn more about, but or have a conversation with you about. But again, it's a whole nother. We're going to turn this into 3 to 5 podcasts with Stefanie Hammond in sales. Screw the cloud. I digress. You're too busy for that. But I want to know more about this book club, and the reason I say that is, I think MSPs and salespeople in general, unless you're a really good salesperson, forget that sales evolves, right? So the way that I sold as an account manager when I joined Enable 8 years ago, right, is completely different from how I would be selling today, right? And I think MSPs forget this. They go, oh, sales is sales, right? They don't think about the psychology. They don't think about the research we do. And one of the reasons I think your book club is so awesome is you seem to pick books that are focused heavily on that. You're not picking a book because it's how to spin sell. You're picking a book because it's offering this new and researched type of sales and marketing motion, which I think would resonate exceptionally well with MSPs. So tell me more about this book club, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah. So the book club was started just earlier this year because, MSPs and again, Horizons report has pulled it out as a key finding over the last 2 years. It was in 2024, it's in 2025. New customer acquisition, lead gen, prospecting continue to be top business challenges facing MSPs today. And yes, I do my office hours. Yes, I do webinars. Yes, I do boot camps. Yes, I am out in the field when I travel up on stage talking about that. But I think it never hurts, like you said, to continually bringing in the experts, because it's not just me saying this. I'm getting a lot of validation from the different books that we've read, but it's just trying to bring another spin, another avenue to offer our MSPs. And you do not need to be an Enable customer to attend the book club. Any MSP that's looking to deal with or address their sales and marketing challenges is more than welcome to join my book club. I promote it very heavily on LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn and I can get you sorted. But yeah, the idea is just to put sales and marketing front and center, because MSPs, a lot of them are technical. They're very technical. They started the business because they know tech very, very well. They don't necessarily have the sales and marketing acumen. So they're getting lost, or they do marketing, whenever they have time, right? Like I call it kind of whack-a-mole marketing. Like I'm going to send out an email and now I'm going to make a phone call and now I'm going to run a campaign on EDR. Please don't run a campaign on EDR. But it's these little pieces, and those are just tactics. So I wanted to kind of bring in books that address marketing strategy, marketing plan, the importance of that, how to have better conversations, how to structure the conversation, how to do, some better marketing. So all the books that we've discussed so far have touched on one of those aspects that I know MSPs are struggling with, from a lead gen, prospecting, how to move the sale forward, how to differentiate myself, just to kind of bring different perspectives into it.
Awesome. And then on top of that, anything else you want to add here? Any other resources or anything else you'd like
Ooh.
to let people know about?
Self-promotion, perfect. Yeah, the other kind of things, and let's kind of talk about what we were talking about today. I have 2 more masterclasses that are being released this summer. So if you're not on vacation and you want to spend some time with the head nerds, I have 2 masterclasses that are really focusing on cybersecurity. How do you build cybersecurity programs that work to protect and defend both virtual environments and physical environment? So really kind of everything that I was talking about today. So the first one is called Threat Ready, Building Resilience in the Face of Risk. This one is really a masterclass that's designed to target, I would say, your most riskiest customers. So if you are supporting customers in healthcare, in education, manufacturing, in legal, in finance, there is a program level that you should be selling them, because there's just so much risk that's inherent to their business. And if they get breached, that could be a big inherent risk to you as the organization, as their MSP. The second one is protecting what matters most. This is about protecting the identity plane. I would say that this would be targeted, a good program, entry-level security program that would be targeted to everyone else. And it really focuses on that identity plane, the Microsoft 365. Because what business doesn't have M365? So so those are 2 master classes that are coming out July, August, and September. It'll be on repeat. So
Awesome. Well, that brings us, I think, to the end of our first episode of our cloud podcast series. Stefanie, I can't thank you enough for being here.
thank you for having me. Making me
Thank you
guest
for
one.
Hey, look, thank you for being flexible to be guest one. I know in our initial planning that wasn't the way it went. So I'm very happy to have you. Um, Last thing I'll say is for folks that are listening to this podcast and have some follow-up questions, you can find me and Stefanie on
Yes.
LinkedIn. You can find us through those master classes. But then also, if you go to the Enable You YouTube channel, you'll find so much Stefanie in sales and marketing that it's not even funny. It's nothing to shake a stick at. She's got what I think it's 13 boot
Yes.
camps in a training series for MSPs, starting with how should I be doing my marketing? What should I target? What should I be putting into my marketing? All the way through your sales process to right at the end. She talks about discovery. She talks about assessments. You talk about bundling and packaging and services and everything that you folks are going to need to kind of follow up on what we're talking about here, because the crux of this is, while we're moving to the cloud doesn't have to truly affect sales. But I think wrapping up quite nicely here again, Stefanie, thank you so much for
Sure.
coming today.
Very
And
well.
I can't wait to see your masterclasses.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Joe. Thanks everyone for
Nice.
watching.